So happy to have, ladies and gentlemen, the special guest we were talking about is Maryam Namazie.
Maryam
Hi,
Namazie,
Maryam.
welcome. Sorry, everybody, unless you've been living under a rock and you do not know who Maryam Namazie is,
I think
I don't
everyone
think,
knows.
yeah, I
I
think
think
they
everyone
would.
knows.
Maryam,
Okay.
thank you so, so much for being here.
Hi, my two lovely men and women. It's great to be here. I'm really happy, particularly because there's lots of things going on in Iran, and I'm just grateful that I can have the opportunity to discuss it with you because I think it's such an important moment in history, not just for people in Iran, but across the globe. So thank you for having me on your show.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for being here. And so, just in case anybody has been living under a rock and you don't know, Maryam Namazie is an Iranian-born writer and campaigner. She is a force to be reckoned with, a personal heroine of mine. I mean, coming from a similar diaspora to Maryam, I had never ever seen a woman speak out as fearlessly as she did. And I'll be honest, I had no role model I could look up to. So it was honestly seeing videos of Maryam take on some of the most like Muslim fanatical inspired youth in some of these organizations in institutions in the UK where you would expect a woman has the ability to speak up. And that just kind of, I mean, that resonated with me. And from then I honestly was inspired to start my activism. So I think there's no better person to bring on here today to speak about what we're seeing actually play out in Iran. And as Maryam said, it's almost this collective fervor now we're seeing across the world. And Maryam and I can go into it as well about what's happening in London, because Maryam was at a protest yesterday. And I think I want to unpack all of that with you as well. But just if you want to touch on, Maryam, how, I mean, we are feeling this. I see Turkish women come out. I see Pakistani women come out. I see women from Afghanistan come out and say, we stand with our Iranian sisters. This seems to be like a watershed moment in Iran on the back of the tragedy we've seen of Mahsa Amini, who was, honestly, she was about to celebrate her 23rd birthday, I think 2 days ago. And this has just spread like wildfire across Iran. So yeah, Maryam, if you just want to kind of give us a backdrop and get into it.
Yeah, thank you, Nuria, for that introduction. And also, it's great to see that you're inspiring, both you and Harris are also inspiring people to be active and to take a stand. So I'm grateful for that as well. With regards to Iran, I think, as you say, really the situation there is something that the whole world is watching. It is a watershed moment. It's very different than previous protests. And I think that is why it has brought people's attention to what's happening there. I think what's important to note is, of course, that this was sparked by this horrible tragedy of a young 22-year-old woman who was visiting Tehran from Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdistan, the city of Saqqez, and she was arrested by the morality police. Not because she was unveiled, but because she was what they say improperly veiled. So and this is something they do regularly. They arrest people, harass them, beat them, imprison them, torture them, send them to re-education centers for this improper veiling or unveiling. And what happened there is that she was beaten so badly that her skull was fractured. And if you look at photos of her on the hospital bed in a coma, there's blood, dried blood in her ear. So it's not the heart attack that the Iranian regime says. She was a healthy young woman. And actually the doctors from the hospital, Kasra Hospital, where she was taken, when she collapsed at the Morality Center Police's offices, prisons, they had said that she had been beaten, but again, that was censored by the Iranian government. So it's very clear that they murdered her, they killed her, and they are murdering people on the streets of Iran who are standing up for her. But the murders and the attacks on women has been taking place for over 40 years, plus years now. What's important about this is seeing people fighting back. And I think this has been the case over many decades in Iran as well. But it's a watershed moment because, one, women are leading it. Men are standing alongside women. The slogans of this, what we're calling a woman's revolution, and for many decades now, we've said that the revolution that's coming in Iran is going to be a female revolution, a woman's revolution. And I think that is unfolding before our eyes. The main slogans are, we don't want an Islamic state. We don't want a dictatorship. And the main slogan is women, life, freedom. I mean, it's just such a beautiful, inspiring slogan and movement with women at its forefront, the unity that we're seeing. And the protests have been taking place in over 80 cities across Iran. And as you also mentioned, we had a protest in London yesterday, but there's also been mass protests like we haven't seen before, unprecedented protests, not just in Iran, but also outside of Iran. And just this outpouring of support from mainstream personalities. You know, it has really inspired people everywhere.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, again, it's happened at such a time where there are world leaders, obviously, which, you know, they should be doing more. The UN General Assembly is sitting at the moment. And I know there are certain Iranian activists in their respective countries who are saying our government is not doing enough. So they're trying to call on, especially here in the UK as well, we're saying call on your individual MP, make this known, go outside the Iranian embassy. But just before we go into that as well, I wanted to unpack the slogans a little bit with you, because I think, as you say, these are very, very poignant slogans that women, life and freedom, death to dictatorship, death to the Iranian dictatorship. So Maryam, if you could just tell us a little bit about how heavily intertwined the symbol of hijab was with the Iranian regime. For example, I was listening to a news report and they were saying that in Iran, news to me, but the general theory behind what the regime was doing is to say, if you, as you rightly mentioned, it's not even veiled properly, but if you are veiled immorally, then this hijab is technically a symbol of the blood of our martyrs. So imagine that level of like the onus that you're putting on a woman when you're saying, if you're covering a few strands of hair, like Mahsa Amini, if you're uncovering a few strands of hair, you are disrespecting the blood of the martyrs of our nation. And they're trying to kind of put this all together and keep this symbol in place. And that's what women now are just absolutely fed up and sick and tired with.
I mean, you know, that is Islamic propaganda. The reality is that the veil is very much an integral pillar of Islamic rule or any theocracy. You know, the control and policing of women and their bodies is integral to their rule. And because it's such a visible sign of Islamic rule, the imposition of that and making sure that visibly they are seen to be in control, it's always fought on the bodies of women. You know, and this is why when you're talking about the hijab, it's not just about a piece of clothing. You know, it is, and it's also not just about women's bodily integrity, which of course it is. You know, women having control over what they wear without the states or morality police or Islamists and fundamentalists or reactionary misogynists, men or women's impositions. But it's very much a direct challenge to Islamic rule, because if there is no hijab in Iran or improperly veiled women, it is really the beginning of the end of an Islamic regime. And I think that's why it's such a challenge. And that's why they arrest and fine and intimidate and beat millions of women every year. What I want to say too is that this movement against the veil is not a new movement. In 1979, after the imposition of compulsory veiling, which started first in government offices in Iran, because as we know, in every society, the Islamists come for women first. All religious theocrats come for women first. There was a mass protest in Tehran against compulsory veiling. And the slogan of the Islamists was, either you wear the veil or you get beaten. Ya Rusari, ya Tusari. That was their slogan. And actually, during that period, women had acid thrown in their faces. They had their veils pinned with pins onto their heads if they weren't doing it. And it was a bloody sort of suppression of women's demand not to be veiled. But nonetheless, since then, so for over 40 years, women have been challenging these rules in various ways. Of course, what we're seeing today in Iran is the fruition of those decades of fights and a new generation that is honestly fearless, brave, courageous, inspiring. I think we are all in awe of them, that they are so fearless in standing up to the morality police, the regime's forces, burning their veil. And we have to remember that this is being done at risk to their lives. Tens of protesters have already been killed. There's been internet blackouts. The regime has brought its full forces out. And in fact, the Iranian president Raisi said that they are going to deal without mercy with the protesters. But what's changed is that people are fearless because, the Islamists rule with fear. We see that everywhere in all of our countries and including in the West. They rule with fear. They impose their rules with fear. They silence people through fear. And when you see fearlessness like that, when you see courage like we've seen of the women and men in Iran, that is contagious. That is contagious. And I think and that's why it's so inspiring, because it's contagious. It brings more courage and hope. I mean, people were saying, it just brings hope. It brings hope that change can happen. And I think that's why it's so important for all of us to support this movement, because it will have effects in all of our countries. If you look at the last 40 plus years, with the advent of and the rise of the Islamist movement and other far-right religious right movements also, it happened with the suppression of the Iranian Revolution and the establishment of an Islamic regime there. We know 40 plus years ago, none of our countries were as Islamic as they are today. And it had a domino effect. So imagine the domino effect of a feminist, a secular, a modern movement in Iran, the domino effect it will have in our regions and across the world. So we have to do it now, because as protesters in Iran say, if we don't see it to fruition, we're going to again watch mass killings. It's just going to be this continuous cycle. It has to end. And this is the time to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And especially what you say about the revolution will be female. And to go even beyond that, like as a woman, it's so heartening for me to see, even the elder women coming out on the streets and standing, because obviously Iran as a country anyway, I think it's something like over 60% of the population are actually under 30. So now we see this massive schism between ruling government and the actual genuine population. But to see elder women now, actually, as you said, Maryam, this has been a long time in the making. This collective anger now is coming out, and the older women who may once upon a time have kind of enforced or internally enforced or policed this, even on a societal level, are saying no, there is no more, and there is no choice element to this. So that again is directly linked to you need to topple and dismantle a theocracy for that any concept of a choice to be implemented. So I just wanted to get your views. Are you seeing that, obviously, as I said, the population is mostly under 30 as well, so we see these young men who actually acknowledge the plight of their sisters and their cousins and their fellow colleagues, and they're standing by them. They're showing solidarity in protest. They're actually helping to safeguard them on the road, so that the militia and stuff can't actually get them, because we're seeing people just being shot left, right, and center for even taking part in this. And we're seeing that some men are losing their sons to this. And even if they weren't as driven by the hijab course in itself, which should be everyone's fight, can I just say, including Western, but even if they weren't driven by it before, they're saying, my son has lost his life. I encourage every parent to go out on the streets and protest. And now this is basically calling out to action that could end your life. So as Maryam was saying, this is such a it's such a watershed, high key moment for Iran, because things could sway in either direction. And we know Iran is a complicated place. So I've been hearing a lot of, this is also a buildup of socioeconomic woes from so long ago. And there's levels of, nationalism and separatist movements, and all of that is coming together, and this cauldron is just kind of boiling. So how far can we separate the hijab and the down with the dictatorship from the rest of what's playing out?
Because I was asking Maryam, I had a detailed chat with Namazie on that as well, and he said there are multiple forces at play. So we'd be very gullible if we think, yes, Mahsa Amini's death it has sparked all of this, but there's so many other forces at play. Even, for example, even as the Kurdish separatist movement, some other hardline religious Islamist people, they've also stood by Mahsa Amini's death, or they could be using it. So how do we know that this is not going to be hijacked, or what do you think that what kind of, if Allah wills, if we can get rid of it, there's a revolution, it won't be hijacked, it won't be another form of Muslim Brotherhood, some other Islamist movement?
Well, look, I mean, just on a couple of points. One is that, I'm 56 years old, so it's not a question of it's only young people. As you said, you're seeing all sorts of generations out on the streets. And I think that, again, Iran is, in a way, a special situation because it's a revolutionary project that was cut short by the Islamist movement. And so you have a population that is, 70% under 30, and also that is a very politicized population because of that revolutionary project that had been cut short. And so therefore, that struggle for women's rights and liberation is something that we've seen over several generations. And now we've reached a generation that is fearless, and that we're watching now standing, fearlessly on the streets. I think, again, also, of course, there are lots of political groups and positions at play. For sure there is. In every society, no society is homogeneous. There are various actors in every situation. But I think what is clear now is that we have a situation where people are united against the Islamic regime, and they are united behind feminist, modern, secular slogans. And I think that is hugely key. The protests from Kurdistan to Tehran, from north to south, east and west, in over 80 cities since I last counted, are united across class, across ethnicity, across gender, across age. And this is a very key moment. Now, what's going to happen next? There are no guarantees, of course. There are no guarantees and we know that very well, in the struggle for change, for human dignity, for women's rights, for equality. There are no guarantees. As we know, the Iranian Revolution was a revolution for equality, for an end to the Shah's dictatorship. It ended into an Islamic regime because, for various reasons, because US foreign policy at the time preferred an Islamic state, given the fact that it was during the Cold War and they were building a green Islamic belt around the Soviet Union at the time, to the fact that they preferred the Islamist movement to the left-leaning revolution that had taken place in Iran. There are lots of various factors for that. So, of course, there are no guarantees. But I think the point is not so much for us to say, to even scaremonger about the future. The point is, where do we stand today? And I think that is key. Where do we stand today in this fight that we see before us? However much the complexities are, there is this movement that is unprecedented, not just in Iran, but in the world. I think we have one other feminist society, that is Rojava, in the middle of war in Syria. Again, thanks to the Kurdish women's uprising there, and the fight that they've done. So the fact that it starts in Kurdistan is key too, because of that revolutionary background of the people of Kurdistan. And of course, there are, egalitarians in Kurdistan and far-right nationalists in Kurdistan, as there are in Tehran, as there are in Pakistan, as there are in Britain. But I suppose the point is, where do we stand, and what role do we play in defending that progressive, egalitarian movement? And that is key, I think. So pushing that forward, showing our solidarity, organizing around it, and making sure that that voice is always heard and always at center stage. I think that's the task of all of us today. On the question of, I just also want to add on the question that Nuria mentioned about the role that governments are playing. Now, as you said, we had Raisi, the president of Iran, who is actually wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity, because he was on the death commission in the 80s when political prisoners were killed en masse. So like 5,000 people were killed in one summer. In trial executions, they were asked, do you believe in God? If they said no, they were executed. Do you pray? If they said no, they were sent to execution. There are, that is that generation from the 80s that was also anti-veil and was fighting for these things. So here he's given the red carpet treatment. He's been allowed to speak at the United Nations. He's been given a visa by the United States. One of the shockers, for example, that are used on protesters, it was made in the UK. So here we have this link of governments, and whether it's direct support or silence on what's happening. I mean, the UK government's Foreign Office has given a statement. All they've said is that they're concerned about what they've reportedly heard, and that they want the Iranian government to investigate. How can you ask the regime that's murdered Mahsa and many others to investigate their own killing?
Exactly.
Absurd. So, I think just to end is that the point is that I don't think we can rely much on governments. We don't want actually their interventions. It always ends in, disaster. But I think we could demand that governments stop supporting and stop relations with the Iranian regime, and let the Iranian people do what they need to do in overthrowing this government.
And Maryam, is there anything? Yeah, go on, Har. Sorry.
I wanted to ask you. I saw you mentioned that a lot of other people are talking about it too. Richard Branson spoke about it. How important is the global support from celebrities and other people? For example, Christiana Amanpour, I know for a different reason though, but she was going to interview Raisi, but he apparently said that you need to put a veil on or hijab on, and she said no. That is a strong movement. But other than Christiana Amanpour, and even that was circumstantial, it wasn't like a organized protest. How important is it that we get the liberal left of the world to actually come out? Because I'm still seeing that there's a lot of support. DW has covered it, but still not the way it is when it comes for protecting the right to wear hijab, which is, again, I'm okay with that, whatever people want to wear. But how important is this global support of other people?
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. Look, if we look historically as well, for example, the racial apartheid regime of South Africa, they fought for decades against that regime. But it's when international solidarity forced Western governments to stop collaborating with the South African apartheid regime and to disinvest, for example, companies to disinvest, that they managed to win their fight. It has to be both internal and external. It has to be, because first of all, we're a global village now, aren't we? What we do, what someone does in Iran impacts us here. What we do here impacts people in Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan and elsewhere as well. If the Islamist movement is strong in Iran, it's strong here, and vice versa. Do you know what I mean? So it's hugely important. One, because obviously, you know how much courage and strength it gives people to see that they are being supported by singers and personalities and activists, and not just other Iranians. you feel like you're not alone. You feel like the world is listening to you for a change. And that gives so much moral support. The other thing is that when there is so much attention, it's not as easy for the Iranian regime to murder people without the world's attention, on it. In the November 2019 protest, they shut the internet for 3 days and killed 1,500 people. They cannot do the same again. One, because of course people are fighting back in a way they never have before, but also because the world is watching. And even the most dictatorial regimes want to portray themselves as not dictatorial, So the Iranian regime has gone to great lengths to say that Mahsa just collapsed. It had nothing to do with us. They're killing people to show that Mahsa's death had nothing to do with them, which is ironic, But the fact of the matter is that it is important. And I think it's immense. Look, Christian Amanpour has interviewed heads of Iranian regime with her veil on. She has. So the fact that she didn't this time is because of those women and men in Iran. And that's key. It has, and as I said, what they're doing there is affecting everyone. There are so many people who have been silent who are now speaking up. And I think we have to take this situation and continue to push forward this idea that theocracy in the 21st century is intolerable. It's unimaginable. It is such a violation of the rights and dignity of 21st century citizens. And I think what Mahsa Amini's, assassination really did is to bring to light how unjust these laws are, and how, important it is to say something. And people are saying something now. So I think it's great, but a lot more needs to be done. And we have to keep fighting and pushing for change that is so needed.
Yeah, I think this was definitely like that spark that ignited that fire, and it gives a whole new dimension to what started off in Iran, even with the White Wednesday protests, things like "my camera is my weapon." Because as you said, in a global village now, with a population so young, they all are astute, they know how to use technology. We get tweets saying, if you don't hear from us in this much time, you know exactly what's happened. So just to wrap up on this, and thank you so much, Maryam, because that was so
I got a
informative.
couple more questions.
Okay.
Couple more questions.
Okay, so just on this point, though, what could you encourage just to ensure that this does not fall on deaf ears, and these aren't just, like secluded protests that even we do here in the West, and then it just kind of, the news cycle moves on. What can we as people do to also amplify and make sure those voices are not falling on deaf ears, even if it's something so minute that's, with the phone in our hand or a call to our local anything? What do you recommend we do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think coming to protests is important. There were so many non-Iranians at the protests yesterday in London, and it was amazing to see women who were they didn't even speak Farsi, shouting Azadi, Azadi, which means freedom, and saying, say her name, Mahsa Amini, and just actually, being one of the people who were leading slogans, and they were not Iranians, so I think that's hugely important. There are so many protests now that it is very possible to do that in many cities across the West and elsewhere, in Turkey, in Tunisia. The Tunisian Atheists and Free Thinkers group organized a protest in front of the Iranian embassy. In Turkey, even though it's quite difficult and there's a lot of violence from Turkish police as well, women and men have organized protests there. So I think that's something that's very key. Also, putting pressure on government officials, as you say, writing letters to your MP, calling them, telling them to stop supporting the Iranian government, to put pressure. It's not about investigation. That's not enough. We don't want investigations. They've been killing people for over 40 years. We want them to stop having relations with this regime. We want to politically boycott this regime. And that will allow people in Iran the chance to do what needs to be done without all the support that this regime continues to receive. And of course, burn veils. remove your veil. If all these protests for hijab day and women donning hijabs in support of women who wear the hijab, honestly, that's a bogus movement. Of course, people have a right to wear the hijab if they want, but at a time of a rising Islamic fundamentalism where women are killed and beaten and tortured for not wearing the hijab, where the hijab is used as a tool from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia to silence and erase women, Hijab Day is a service to the Islamist movement. It is not a service to women's rights. I'd like to see some of those women remove their hijabs in defense of women in Iran. Of course, we'll never see that because their movement is not about women's rights. It's about defending the hijab. It's about defending Islam in power. Has nothing to do with women's rights and equality. But all those Western women, the Western politicians who go to Iran wearing the hijab while women are being killed for not wearing it, all those media personalities who wear the hijab to interview criminals who should be in jail and not running the government of Iran. We are asking them, remove that veil, refuse to wear the veil, come and burn a veil at our rallies or, in public spaces, and defend women's rights and equality. Today, if you want to defend women's rights and equality in the face of Islamic fundamentalism, it is by standing against the veil. That's not to say that you have to discriminate against women who are veiled. Never, don't you dare touch a woman who's veiled. Don't you dare touch a woman who's veiled. But if you want to stand for women's rights, you have to stand against the veil. You have to stand against compulsory veiling. And you have to stand for women today who are leading that fight. And that is the brave women and men in Iran.
Wow.
That was powerful stuff.
I was going to ask you, you said that it is heartening to see how these people are coming out. And to me, it's so brave. And you said that why we need more Western voices, powerful voices to speak up on this issue, because last time it happened in 2019, they killed 1,500 people. Now we're seeing the same thing. The internet has been shut down, and this is why a lot of people are bringing in Elon Musk with his Starlink in as well, because, hey, you should bring it up. I just wanted to bring that one of your thoughts on this, because now you've highlighted that this is straight out of Iran's playbook. Now, do you think that they're going to double down on the protesters? Because there are a lot of statements coming out that we're going to crush this rebellion or this unrest or whatever that is. They've arrested the female activist. So I don't know if it's female or not, but Majid Tawakoli, an activist who has been repeatedly imprisoned in Iran in recent years, has been the woman who broke this news of Mahsa Amini has been arrested as well. Her Twitter account has been deleted. Do you fear that there would be, Iran would be doubling down on these protesters, sending in the army? Because right now we're seeing these footages coming in where these protesters going out and they're actually confronting this morality police and taking them head on.
For sure, Iran is going to try and use all of its force, as it always has, because it rules with suppression and killing and murder. It doesn't rule in any other way. And that's the only way it can maintain its power. But, the tide has turned against it. And I think, there's young people, for example, putting on social media the fact that they've got a call from, the security police saying, we're going to come and arrest you to your house. And you hear the young man saying, I'm going to be on the streets here and there at this time. Why don't you come and meet me there? They know this person's name. They know where he or she lives. And this is the response they're giving the security. And also, not only that, they're putting this information out on social media for everybody to see. You have people who, Mahsa Amini's parents, at her burial, on her gravestone, it says, our dear Gina. Her name is Gina, but in Iran, Kurdish names are banned, and therefore her Persian name is Mahsa. Dear Gina, your name, you will not die because your name will become a symbol. And that's it. This is parents who are grieving and mourning the death of their daughter, and this is what they write on her gravestone. So, this is the reality that we're faced with today. This is a population that is no longer afraid. And I think when you are no longer afraid, that is the beginning of their end, because that is all they have, the fear that they impose. And so I think we have to show some of that fearlessness and some of that courage, especially because we're not living in theocracies, many of us who are living in the West. We have a responsibility to be their voice, to extend their voice, and to defend this movement that is a universal movement. That slogan, women, life, freedom, is a universal struggle. We all feel it, especially those of us who are ex-Muslim, those of us who are apostates. We feel that slogan at our very core, because it represents everything that we have been fighting for: the right to live without fear, the right to be free, to think as we choose, and particularly the right as women not to be controlled and policed and suppressed, and to live the life that we want. So this is a universal battle cry, and that's why it has inspired so many. But we need all to link our hands. It's a moment in history where, as I said, no battle is guaranteed. Are we going to be on the side to push it to win, or are we going to sit back and watch and keep saying, well, they're killing people? They're killing people every day. They have killed people for 40 plus years, but the difference is those people there are fighting and standing up against them, and we need to be there with them.
I think it's significant that Mahsa Amini's father refused to let them do the Islamic prayer over her. Yeah, exactly. And he essentially said, this regime is what took my daughter away, and you have the audacity to try and...
He said this is your Islam. But it's something even more powerful to that effect. He said, your Islam killed it, and now you want to do Islamic funeral.
Yeah, exactly. So to that effect, I mean, you can see like this is a massive problem now. And as Maryam was saying, like, this is whether you're a celebrity or whether you're just, a regular person, like me, I'm not going to say Maryam's a regular person, or even Haris, they're much bigger activists than me. But knowing that I have this powerful tool right in front of me that can enact to be even the tiniest iota part of this movement, to make sure that one girl from that village in Iran's voice is not being silenced because her regime is just turning all connection off to the world. We are beyond that. We stand with our sisters there. If she can't get in touch and tell the Western world or the UN what's happening, we will be their voices when they don't have one. So I think it's really important to get these issues to your MP, get the Iranian war crimes, get Mahsa Amini's death, get these things tabled at Parliament, get them to really consider their relationships with Iran, do whatever you can in your own small way. But as Maryam said, like, this whole movement now is to make sure, and it's every individual one of our duties to ensure, that Mahsa Amini's death is not in vain. The fact that she couldn't even use her, and even her real name has not gone out there to the world, that already makes me feel like she was even her match from her in that way. So Iran has, but this, as Maryam said, the fight starts with where we are right now, and right now we're at a tipping point. Doing your little way against the hijab being forced on these women as an inherent pillar of that regime, we have to do our bit.
All right. Well, Maryam, thank you very much for you're on mute. Thank you very much for coming in and enlightening us with all this. Obviously, we're thinking of you all the time. I'm obviously following, tweeting your tweets, and keeping ourselves up to date with whatever you bring to our information. Best of luck, and I'm really gearing for this end to this terrorist Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you to both of you for having me, and just long live the women's revolution in Iran. It's coming, and we all can play an important role. So just thanks again, and hopefully you'll keep covering. Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
No, I was going to say, and we will keep in touch, and we can keep an eye on what's happening in Iran, because Perfect. As I said, this cannot be just put into a news cycle and forgotten about. So yeah, but thank you so much for everything you're doing so far. Yeah, let's keep fighting.
Bye,
Maryam. Thank you.
Bye.
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 All right, guys. So that was Maryam Namazie, and obviously, as she
That was
said, I think it comes down to all of us, especially us who are living in the West. And I'm more of a, this kind of a. I'm gonna try to ask. I'm gonna try to ask ex-Muslims of Australia. I haven't been in touch with these guys. We do have 7,200 people. What Maryam is very hands-on. I'll make you feel my presence kind of a person, where she goes and organizes these protests. I think maybe we could do that here in Australia as well. So if you guys see
yes,
this,
get some of this fire sparked in Australia, very much so. Burning hijabs, all like, I mean, I was gonna say down under because you're down under from here, but burning hijabs there would I mean, it would be such a why are you laughing?
it was not the appropriate use of the term down under at this point. But yeah, sure.
No,
Okay, that's fine.
that's
So we're gonna obviously talk. I'm gonna try to get, if you get this message, I'm gonna try to get all you guys in Australia. Send me an email on haris@harissultan.com, and I'll try to get other ex-Muslims to see if they are interested. That they're all over the place. Maybe we could organize a little protest ourselves. As obviously a lot more happens in big cities like London. I don't even know if there's a Iranian embassy or consulate, whatever they call them, in Melbourne or Sydney. I think it might be just in Canberra, and nobody lives in Canberra. Nobody goes to Canberra. So yeah.
If you like these videos and want to support me in my activism, then you can support me on Patreon or PayPal. Stay free, everyone.